I had been working as a nurse across multiple hospitals and care facilities, so dealing with elderly patients was nothing new to me. Before my current job, I took a position at a geriatric hospital, about 30 minutes from my house. At the time, I had only been there for a couple of weeks, and although I didn't know it yet, one particular night would end up being one of my last shifts there. I was working the graveyard shift, already running on almost no sleep. That night, I was assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. The patients there seemed to really like me. Being a young woman in my 20s, I think my presence brought them some comfort. Many of them spent their days lost in fragments of memory, drifting between past and present, and having someone there with them, even briefly, seemed to ground them in reality. I was responsible for several patients that night, but one stood out more than the others. Her name was Lena. It was my first time taking care of her, and from the moment my shift began, she seemed distressed. Every time I entered her room, she would tell me about the voices she kept hearing, and about a man dressed in black who stood in the corner of the room watching her. Her roommate had actually requested to be moved before my shift started because Lena's behavior was disturbing her. Despite everything, Lena herself was kind. She would smile whenever I came in, though she was very forgetful and often seemed lost. By around 11 p.m., most of the patients were asleep, but Lena wasn't. She kept calling me back into the room, frightened by what she was hearing and seeing. I have to admit, it started to get under my skin. I believed that, in her mind, these things were real, and I felt sympathy for her. It must have been terrifying. Still, I tried to calm her down the best I could. I held her hands, spoke softly, and reassured her that she wasn't alone, that I was nearby if she needed anything. Eventually, it seemed to help. She relaxed, and the next time I checked on her, she was asleep. Once the ward quieted down, the night slowed to a crawl. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. A couple of hours later, I was in the linen room, restocking my cart. It was a small, silent space, and I had the door closed. That's why I immediately noticed when I heard a noise behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there. Assuming I had imagined it, I went back to what I was doing. Then suddenly I felt something, clear as day, a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't light or accidental. It felt firm, like someone had actually grabbed me. I froze. I looked at my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was no one there. Panicking, I stepped out into the hallway and looked around. It was completely empty. No nurses, no patients, nothing. Just silence. I didn't know what else to do, so I went back inside and forced myself to keep working. When I finished restocking, I turned toward the door, and that's when I saw him. Through the small glass window in the door, a man dressed entirely in black was standing on the other side, staring directly at me. He was smiling. I collapsed to the floor, screaming. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The man didn't move at first. He just stood there, smiling. Then, suddenly, he stepped out of view. Seconds later, the door opened, and another nurse rushed in to help me up. I was hysterical, barely able to speak. I asked her if she had seen the man. She looked confused. "What man?" she asked. "There's no one here. We checked every room in the ward, but there was no sign of anyone matching that description. No one dressed in black, no one out of place. My screams had woken Lena." When I went into her room, she immediately started talking about the voices again. This time, she mentioned hearing screams, my screams, though she didn't know they were mine. Trying to steady myself, I asked her what the man she kept seeing looked like, and if he was smiling. She looked at me, and for the first time that night, her expression changed. her eyes focused in a way I hadn't seen before. Then she asked me, quietly, "How did you know?" My heart skipped. Before I could respond, she began screaming, louder than before, begging to be taken out of the room, saying he was coming for her. Other nurses rushed in to calm her down, and I was reassigned to a different ward for the rest of the night. Not long after, I went home early. I was too shaken to continue. The next day, I spoke to the head nurse and told her that my next shift would be my last. The experience had completely unsettled me, and I didn't feel safe in that building anymore. She was understanding, and I left on as good terms as possible. I've never been diagnosed with anything, and I've never experienced hallucinations before. I understand how powerful sleep deprivation can be, but this felt like something beyond that. The sensation of that hand on my shoulder, the image of that man behind the glass door, and the fact that his appearance matched exactly what Lena had been describing all night. It's something I still can't explain, and I can only hope it was something that will never happen again. About 3 years ago, I contracted bacterial meningitis. I was living in South Florida at the time, and as far as I knew, there wasn't any outbreak happening, so I never really understood how I got it or where it came from. It started with intense symptoms, severe headaches, confusion, extreme fatigue, nausea, and a complete loss of appetite. But it wasn't until the hallucinations began that I realized something was seriously wrong. One day, while I was lying in bed, sick, and my husband was at work, I heard a child's voice from downstairs call out, "Mom." That immediately confused me, because we don't have any children. Despite how weak I felt, I forced myself out of bed and went toward the stairs, calling out my husband's name. Of course, there was no answer. He wasn't even home. The effort made my headache worse, so I went back to bed. Not long after, I heard the voice again. This time it simply said, "Hello." That's when panic really set in. I grabbed my phone and called my husband, telling him I was hearing a child's voice in the house, and that I thought I might be hallucinating. Hearing how distressed I was, he immediately left work to come get me and take me to the hospital. While I was waiting for him, I tried to get dressed, but I suddenly felt the urge to vomit and ran to the bathroom. As I was throwing up, I heard another voice just outside the bathroom door. I couldn't make out exactly what it said, and I couldn't tell if it was the same voice as before, but it only made me feel like I was completely losing my mind. I wasn't diagnosed until I reached the hospital, where doctors quickly realized how serious my condition was. They told me that untreated bacterial meningitis can be extremely dangerous, even fatal. When I mentioned the hallucinations, they said it was unusual but not unheard of. I was immediately given antibiotics through an IV, and the doctor later told me I was lucky I had come in when I did. Waiting any longer could have led to permanent damage or worse. My husband stayed with me for a few hours, but I was told I would need to remain in the hospital for several days due to the severity of my condition. Around 10 that night, he left to go home. Since he had work the next day, the nurse told me to call her if I needed anything. Even though I still felt terrible, I fell asleep fairly quickly. At some point during the night, I had what felt like an incredibly vivid dream. In it, my ex-husband was standing beside my hospital bed, looking down at me. He was talking, saying terrible things about my current husband. At one point, he patted my head and said he was glad I was okay, and that he had come as soon as he saw my husband leave. Then his tone shifted, and he started ranting about how much he despised my husband and how he wanted to kill him. He kept touching my forehead before eventually leaving the room. I've had nightmares about my ex before due to how toxic and abusive our marriage was, so I assumed it was just another bad dream. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I felt disoriented and lightheaded. I noticed that a chair had been pulled up right next to my bed, even though it hadn't been there when my husband left. Still half asleep, I didn't think much of it and drifted off again. The next morning, a nurse came into the room, and I told her about the strange, vivid dream I had. She laughed at first and casually said that it wasn't a dream, that my cousin had come to visit me the night before. That immediately confused me. I told her I didn't have any cousins living in the state. Her expression changed, and she said that someone who identified himself as my cousin David had visited late that night. David was my ex-husband's name. After I explained the situation more clearly, the nurse called in a doctor. He told me that the antibiotics combined with my condition could have caused delirium, making it difficult to distinguish between sleep and reality. According to him, it was possible that I had imagined or misinterpreted what happened. Later, I called my husband and told him everything. He was both concerned and angry, and came back to stay with me that evening. During the day, I also texted David, demanding to know why he had come to see me and how he even knew I was in the hospital. My message was delivered, but he didn't respond right away. I sent another message, telling him I had heard everything he said, and warning him that I would involve the police. A few minutes later, he replied. He denied making any threats, and said he had only come to check on me after hearing what had happened. He insisted that I must have imagined the rest while I was half asleep. I told him to stay out of my life or I would take further action. After that, he never responded again. I never told my husband about the threats I thought I heard that night. Between the hallucinations I had already experienced and the effects of the medication, I couldn't be sure what was real and what wasn't. It's possible that my mind filled in things that were never actually said, but even now, I can't say that with complete certainty. I stayed in the hospital for several more days and was eventually discharged the following week. Even after recovering, that experience stayed with me, not just because of how serious the illness was, but because of how real everything had felt in those moments where I couldn't trust my own mind. It was New Year's Eve of 2016, and my girlfriend and I were hosting a party at my condo. I had invited around 30 people and told everyone they could bring friends, as long as they were respectful of the place. Earlier that evening, while we were setting everything up, we started noticing something strange. Small things kept going missing, like the TV remote, her bag, or other items we needed at the moment, and then a few minutes later they would reappear in places we had already checked. At first, we thought we were just being forgetful or accidentally moving things without realizing it, so we ignored it and continued preparing for the party. Around 9 to 10 p.m., guests started arriving. Since many people had brought friends, there were several unfamiliar faces in the crowd. To be cautious, I had already set up surveillance cameras in rooms where we kept valuables, like the living room and near the bedrooms. Even after everyone had arrived, things still kept disappearing. At one point, I wanted to show my friends a new pair of shoes my girlfriend had given me for Christmas, but I couldn't find them anywhere. I also noticed that my bedroom window was open, which seemed odd, but I assumed it was just part of the chaos of hosting a party. As midnight approached, everyone gathered around the TV to watch the ball drop. While looking around the room, I noticed a tall man wearing a black trench coat standing near the wall opposite the TV. He seemed out of place, quietly looking down as if he was doing something near the couch. I was about to ask my friend Alan if he knew who the man was, but the countdown began, and everyone's attention shifted to celebrating the new year. When the cheering, hugs, and celebrations settled, I realized that the man was no longer in the room. When I casually asked someone about him, they told me he was Tom's friend, so I didn't think much of it. Later, one of my friend's girlfriends came downstairs and mentioned that the man in the trench coat had been in the bathroom for a long time and wasn't coming out. I reassured her that he was supposedly Tom's friend and suggested she use another bathroom. As the night went on, the party began to wind down, and by around 2 a.m., most of the guests had left. My girlfriend and I decided to quickly check if anything important was missing before going to bed. That was when we realized her bag was completely gone, along with some of my expensive watches. We immediately went to the bedroom to check the surveillance footage. As we fast-forwarded through the recordings, we eventually spotted the man in the trench coat. He was seen entering the guest bedroom and going through our belongings. I paused the footage, feeling a surge of anger, and quickly clipped a short segment to send to Tom. I texted him, accusing his friend of stealing from us. However, Tom responded with confusion, saying he didn't recognize the person at all. After sending him the video, he insisted again that he had no idea who the man was. At that point, I started messaging other friends who had attended the party, asking if anyone knew the man. One by one, they all replied that they had never seen him before. Growing increasingly uneasy, my girlfriend and I returned to the footage and continued watching. We saw the man enter our bedroom, open the window, and begin dropping our belongings outside, including my girlfriend's bag. Suddenly, he seemed to react as if he had heard something, and then he quickly crawled under the bed. We froze as we watched, unable to process what we were seeing. We fast-forwarded further through the footage, but he never came out from under the bed. Slowly, we looked down at the bed we were sitting on, realizing that the same man could still be underneath us. My girlfriend was on the verge of screaming, so I covered her mouth and whispered that we needed to run. However, she let out a cry, and I immediately told her to run. We rushed out of the room, and just before slamming the door, I glanced under the bed and saw him staring back at me. We locked ourselves in the kitchen, grabbed knives for protection, and called the police. They arrived within minutes, but by the time they searched the condo, the man had already escaped. The bedroom window was open again, and it was clear that he had used it to get away. We later handed over the footage to the police, who reviewed it and captured a clear image of his face. Despite their efforts, the man was never identified or found. The entire experience left us shaken, and even now, the memory of that night, and the moment we realized he was under the bed with us, remains impossible to forget.